I do have a voice for radio. I probably have a face for radio too. And that was the first time I got that ugly feeling inside my body. Like, I think I'm dying. Whatever is going on with this Bancho's accent is not from here. Because it breaks you and it sucks the joy out of you. And I could tell that that had happened to me. I went out a lot, I hung out a lot, I pulled a lot of people for chats. I looked like I was thriving, and then I crashed and had to go away. Welcome to the Bandying Show, Episode 1, Autoimmunity, a Life Sentence. Womp, womp. For the longest time, I didn't know how to spell womp, womp, and used to spell it wah, wah. And finding out the correct spelling was absolutely life-changing. If you're watching this, you know that my name is Amrit Bandy, hence the Bandying Show. Bandy is short for my last name, Bandapadhyay, which I sometimes say is the long name that goes on forever, or the name that begins in band and ends in yay. I don't expect anybody to be able to say it. I'm also not interested in anybody taking their shot at it and looking at me like, did I do a good job? You probably did not. My first name is pronounced Amrit, but when people get this two-syllable name wrong, I sometimes playfully used to say, it's like an umbrella, Rit rhymes with sit. But recently, some asshat couldn't help saying, then why don't you spell it like umbrella? For which I had to go all American and say, it's spelt and pronounced like in America. And then I had to go all British and use the expression which I think goes, you are the weakest link. Fuck off. Well, I am starting a podcast, or at least I think I am, but I've learned the hard way. If you want to make God laugh, announce your plans. Thank God I'm not religious. In fact, the only lie I've ever told on a dating app, in my first dating profile, I selected spiritual, not religious, and the narrator was probably like, yeah, he was not spiritual either. I want this podcast to be fun, funny, interesting, passionate, and sometimes downright silly. A lot like the first time you met me, or the last, or anything in between. But most importantly, I want it to be joyful. Joy and joy experience are in short supply in the world around us right now. And joy is just one of those amazing feelings that somehow you don't have that much control over. Fun is much more in your control. Money helps. Happy and content once you're not too deprived is a bit of a state of mind. And well-being, which tracks with serotonin, is a lot about feeling taken care of, safe, loved, either by yourself or people around you. And euphoria, sex, or drugs, or sex and drugs will do it. And then there's joy. Sometimes you just don't know what's going to spark it. And sometimes when the triggers that should spark it are met, you don't know if you'll be able to experience it. The other thing that doesn't get talked about a lot is how important joy is and can be to recovery, especially long-term recovery from illnesses and disorders, like trying to feel some joy or remembering that you can feel joy. And if you're not there yet, at least being happy and content with what you have and trying to stay positive. And if you're not even there yet, at least trying to not be negative. This whole spectrum of positive emotion that leads towards joy. Because these days, you do hear the names of the biggest disorders, usually during fundraising, and you do hear the names of the biggest drugs, because TV just can't help itself. And then you hear a barrage of cliches and mantras. Means I could pronounce it mantra for you, but I would die a little bit on the inside, and they would probably cancel my overseas citizenship. True story. But yeah, what you don't hear are the details of the painstaking process each person develops just to survive, almost killing yourself to stay alive, the skills learned, and what it feels like when the process is working, what it feels like when it's not working, and the techniques and tricks that each person uses to make it more efficient, more bearable, more doable, and the thoughts and decisions that go into mixing it up when it's not working. Instead, it's all thrown into this Rocky type of montage where it's almost glorified, or a Game of Thrones type of introduction, like Mother of Dragons and Survivor of Autoimmunes, where even somebody who's impressed might be like, and how does one become a Mother of Dragons exactly? You care to elaborate? If you've been around me, you've probably heard me talking to other people about their mental health and their health issues, but I don't share a lot about myself. I'm definitely going to do a lot of that on this podcast because unfortunately I have insane amounts of experience with both of them because I have not been dealt very good cards. In the last 5 years, I have come close to feeling like I'm taking my last gasps. I've been to countless doctors' offices. After 10 years of intense physical therapy, I was in advanced physical therapy for 2.5 years, where I ended up because I could feel inside my body that I'm about to lose the use of my legs and become disabled in a year or two. And I also needed any help I could get with easing the brain fog from the chronic fatigue that was 24/7 and left me almost useless. And just when I was starting to make some progress, 2024 turned into my year from hell. And I ended up in the ER over and over. I was hospitalized. So I don't know what's going to happen to me next. And I don't know how long I have, especially with the abilities that I'm used to. Because in the last 5 years, for long periods of time, I have lost the ability to breathe properly, to sit properly, to stand properly, to play guitar, to sing, to read, to even listen to music. So I'm going to talk about that in this episode. It might be a bit bumpy because I'm one of those people who does not get any pleasure or feel any relief from talking about it. But it's all going to be in my voice. I do have a voice for radio. I probably have a face for radio too, which some of you all have a crush on because I read some of my DMs. So I'll put up video of this somewhere. In the least, it's going to have my accent, which Brits say is a bit American, Americans say is a bit British, and Indian people are like, whatever is going on with this Banchod's accent is not from here. I like to say that just like me, it's half British, half Indian, and half American. There's more than a whole lot going on, and the math is definitely not mapping. Favorite Gen Z expression. So back in 2003, when I just moved to Maryland from Bama for grad school, I was walking around New York Christmas Eve when I felt this weird pain in my foot. It felt wrong from the get-go, but I didn't think much of it. And I visited my parents in India over New Year's and felt this excruciating, ungodly pain in my left hip, the bursa, the outer bone, and then in my lower back, the SI joint. It felt like this horrifying, unnatural pain from the beginning. When I stood on it, it felt like it was dislocated or like somebody was taking a baseball bat to it. And when I sat down, it felt like somebody has just taken a baseball bat to it or that I'd been in a horrible accident. And that's what my brain keeps saying for the last 20 years. We've been in an accident. We've been in a horrible accident, but I have not. When I got back to Maryland, the pain spread to the right side, to the right hip, to the right SI joint, and it became very hard for me to walk properly. At this point, cortisone shots started going in, and if you know your sports, players often run back onto the field after these shots. They barely made a dent for me, and it didn't end there. The inflammation then got inside the glute bones. I don't know what it's called, but the place where your legs meet the pelvic girdle. And at this point, it became very hard for me to find a way to sit or stand properly without feeling unbearable pain. It became impossible for me to walk properly because the heel strike impact goes straight through that joint. And I would struggle to get out of chairs. I would get stuck in chairs and I would be reduced to crawling by the end of the day. It was insanely painful. And that many big joints being affected at the same time probably played a big part in my downward spiral. And then, like a nightmare that just won't end, it didn't end there. The inflammation then got into my rib cage, to my jaw, to my right shoulder, till at one point I only had a left shoulder that worked, and I would be awake in the middle of the night in pain, unable to turn myself over for what felt like hours. And then I would crawl around in the middle of the night trying to get to a counter where I could pull myself up with my left hand. It was a total shit show. And after 6 months of this, when an orthopedist who kind of knew his stuff looked at me like he was sorry for me and said, "I don't know what's wrong with you, but I've ordered tests," that's when I realized something horrible has happened here. Like, I could feel it every day inside my body, but I kind of hadn't accepted it. While they were testing me for all these diseases that only happen to other people, not to you, like lupus and Lyme's and rheumatoid arthritis and AIDS, when I got home, I started looking online myself. It didn't even take that long. I found my perfect match. I diagnosed myself, even called my parents and told them, I know what I have. And I remember the moment I gave up that narrative that I'm going to be better in a couple of weeks, the pain hit my head different. And that was the first time I got that ugly feeling inside my body, like, I think I'm dying. And I don't know what it's like to be told that I have a short amount of time to live, but I do know what it's like to get a life sentence. And I got mine at 24. I was told I have a rare inflammatory autoimmune disorder called ankylosing spondylitis that is genetic, lifelong, and not curable. That it's autoimmune in the sense that the body attacks its own joints and cells and damages them, and that it's inflammatory in the sense that it causes spiraling inflammation and pain in the biggest joints in the body, specifically the lower back, the sacroiliac joints. And then I heard a bunch of stuff that was just hard to process, that since it causes bone damage, bone might try to regrow, and that my vertebrae might fuse together and I might get bent forward, and that since I have so much hip involvement, I have a bad case of a bad disorder which predisposes me to organ failure and damage and to other inflammatory disorders, and the internet added lower life expectancy, but that there are these new drugs on the market and we'll put you on them and we'll make you as comfortable as we can. I remember being taken aback by that expression because I've heard that one before. So I was put on these drugs, which are called TNF blockers and are immunosuppressants. So I am both autoimmune and immune compromised. So now when I end up in the ER, sometimes I just don't know which one might have played a role. These were some of the most expensive drugs on the market back then. They're injections, which were harder to take 20 years ago when tech wasn't so far along. I both responded to them and was in excruciating pain for 4 years. But I was really young, so I stayed in school, I limped around campus, even co-founded a really cool startup, a firefighter tracking startup that was one of the first companies in the world to demonstrate tracking people indoors, like James Bond or Jack Bauer being tracked back at CTU by Chloe. And the more I could do, I buried myself in my startup and set off on what seems to be my MO. During the worst times, I just survive from one day to the other, maybe latch on to something like the startup, while also daydreaming that what am I going to do if and when I get better? And when I do, I take my shot. So in 2008, when the pain started coming down, I moved to DC. Then I had a band that played around town. I made a lot of friends. I went out a lot. I hung out a lot. I pulled a lot of people for chats. I looked like I was thriving, and then I crashed and had to go away. I call this Neo in the Matrix or Amrit in the Matrix Part 1, because this was my upper 20s, and if you know me from my upper 30s, you could be like, yeah, that's exactly what this fucker was doing when I knew him. And in the movie, the architect tells Neo, every time we reboot you, you do exactly the same things, you make exactly the same choices, you end up right here, you look confused, you scream and shout, and then you go through that door and the cycle begins all over. So on with it. But in 2008, while I was able to do more, I noticed that I had started feeling very tired, which by 2010 became a feeling of weakness, and by 2012 I was just unable. Unable to do my chores, especially things like going to the grocery store and cooking, while I was still able to do my startup work or music stuff. Later on that year, when I felt even more unable, I went to India for 2 months to see if a break would help me feel better. And when it did not, I just wanted to feel better. So I went running outside on concrete. This was a mistake. Throughout this story, I've made a lot of mistakes. So have the people around me, so has the medical system. But this is not about that. Also, big parts of this chapter of the story are for another day. But my joints got completely inflamed by the shock of what I had just done. But it led me to realize that my hip muscles and my glute muscles and my back muscles, everything responsible for walking, had completely atrophied, and there was barely any muscle left there. And I'd somehow figured out a way to walk without using these muscles, probably because of the trauma and to save myself and my joints from that pain. And even when I bent to the ground, I kind of used the atrophy to move these joints away from the weight-bearing path. And when I try to force them to engage, they start shaking or throttling. Another way to view atrophy is in 2012, I fell to 110 pounds. I didn't look that bad, but you can see it if you look for it. And in contrast, I'm 160 pounds right now, and people will still think that I'm slim or skinny. And only 4 pounds of that is Madeline cookies, which Target won't stop stocking, and I won't stop eating because somebody has to keep them in business. The whole thing was a huge shock to me, but I slowly started learning these meditation practices so that I could deal with the pain and the agony. Over years, I've become an expert at least for my purposes. And then I started doing the yoga breathing exercises called pranayama so that I could get some exercise. And the month after that, I started the physical yoga exercises to get some exercise without impact. And the month after that, I started running, or more like scampering, on a treadmill. And I built this process for myself that I would execute every day. And after 6 months of that, when I was just about able, I came back to the US. This was really important to me. If you talk to people like me, they'll sometimes tell you that the disease prevents them from achieving their destiny. In my case, I've known what my destiny or fate is since I was 24. It is to become disabled and to have to move back to my hometown, which is a nice but small town, back into my parents' home from where I will never get back. And I've been running from this destiny for more than 20 years, and it keeps catching up with me like Final Destination. But when I got back to the US, I had put on some healthy weight and some tone, but I noticed that my hip muscles were still as atrophied as they were. So I asked my rheumatologist to send me to physical therapy, where I had an excellent physical therapist who measured that my hips barely had any strength because I could not start the hip strength test. He taught me all these exercises that I'd never heard of before. And physical therapy in the beginning was pure misery and suffering. I would lie on the ground doing these strenuous exercises, get completely drained, zero endorphins, but at the same time, I felt something inside my body that told me that this is good for me. And my therapist was like, you seem to be very hardworking because you're doing them every day instead of twice a week. So keep doing it for 6 months and you will start seeing results. Since he said 6 months, I was like, I'm going to do it for at least 2 years. And in the spirit of not shying away from things that are hard to talk about, when the 2 years became 4 years and my progress was slower than expected, I asked my rheumatologist to send me back to him. And and found that he had passed away in a horrible accident. And it was really hard and fucked up to hear that somebody who was kind and strong and positive, that life had been that cruel to them. Anyway, I added everything he taught me to my process. I would wake up and do my meditation and breathing exercises first thing in the morning. Then I would move on to my physical therapy exercises, get completely drained, have some lunch, kind of pass out, but then jump back up and head to Rock Creek Park to try to walk around using my muscles. I'd heard the expression learn to walk again, which is more for neurological disorders and spinal cord injuries. But I thought that maybe if I keep powering away, something inside will start clicking. I learned years later that I was just slowly building the muscles by which someday I shall learn to walk again, and that day has not come yet. But after 6 months of this, I started feeling like I can't do this every day, that I'm feeling tired. And I took this as a good sign, that things are hitting different, they're hitting right, and it's time for me to reboot. I also ran out of savings, so I co-founded another startup, this time the sleep improvement startup, that invented a wearable device that tells you whether you're dreaming or not, whether your body is healing with deep sleep or not, and teaches people cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And then I had a band that played around town. I made a lot of friends. I went out a lot. I hung out a lot. I pulled a lot of people for chats. And I looked like I was thriving. And then I crashed and had to disappear again. Amrit and the Matrix, Part 2. But throughout these years, I never stopped doing my physical therapy exercises 3 times a week, like my life depended on it, both out of fear, but also because they were my friend and weapon against the disease. I struggled a lot to pull that off. I gave up a lot to pull that off. But by 2018, I started noticing that I'm starting to feel very tired again. And I'm also starting to feel a bit broken. And I noticed cracks within me. And I kind of realized that in having this kind of pain disorder for at that time 15 years, it does something to you. Uncontrolled pain that ramps up with no end in sight, almost like torture, but there's nobody on the other end who can even make it stop. It breaks you. And in parallel, the fix, the rehab, the physical therapy, that kind of breaks you too. You struggle through these impossible to do exercises that take everything out of you, but you feel a bit up right after. And then you crash into this shaking kind of recovery where you feel like I can't take this anymore. But you start feeling a bit better when you're coming out of it. But before you're even ready, you go again. And you repeat this cycle hundreds and hundreds of times. In my case, thousands and thousands of times. It breaks you. And it's probably the reason some of our favorite sports stars walk away from sports like football and tennis, sometimes the most joyful people, because it breaks you and it sucks the joy out of you. And I could tell that that had happened to me. But at the same time, I felt some overall joy from being able to do all these things that I never thought I would be able to do again, like have a startup and have a band. And I showed up for all my friends and family. But by 2019, I started to feel completely broken. And this ugly kind of chronic fatigue had entered my body, where by the end of the day, I would feel like I'm not going to make it, which is an extreme exhaustion response. I even told some people around me something really bad is going to happen to me and I'm not going to be able to work very soon. And then COVID happened, the world shut down. I buried myself in my startup. It kind of helped that I didn't have to show up anywhere. I tried to keep doing my music things too, put up some videos, but I was horribly out of breath. I was struggling for air, and I would have to lie down in the middle of the day on the couch for hours. But suddenly I would get a rush of adrenaline and head to a protest, and I would feel good about it because it was really important. But then I would pay the price for going, and I was like somebody who's drowning, going under, coming back up for air, flailing around, then going back down again, until in November, the chronic fatigue completely took over my body, and there was nothing left of me.